What's going on, you guys? So there have been some, I guess, conversations as of late when it comes to Devin Haney, right? And we all saw Brian Norman Jr., his father, Brian Norman Sr., go on Mill City Boxing, and pretty much throw out allegations that Devin Haney is potentially juicing, right? And there has been no proof whatsoever that Devin Haney has been on performance-enhancing drugs whatsoever. This is a guy who's never tested positive, a guy who comes across and as a clean athlete, and is an advocate for drug testing during fight camps, and even when somebody's not in camp, right? He's all for the VADA 365. So a lot of people have been saying, this is completely ridiculous of, Brian Norman Sr. to say these things. And, he's clearly coping with the fact that his son got beat by Devin Haney, this, that, and the other, right? And my thoughts on it are this. You can't accuse him of it because, like I mentioned earlier, he's never been caught. But would it surprise me if Devin Haney was on performance-enhancing drugs? No, it really wouldn't. It wouldn't at all. And here's the reasons, man. It's because I think there's a lot of fighters in the sport of boxing that are cheaters. Whether it's performance-enhancing drugs, whether it's, using loaded gloves, loaded hand wraps, what, you name it, right? I think there's just a lot of cheating within the sport of boxing, right? And the more bigger profile name you are as a fighter, I think it's a lot harder to catch those guys. I mean, I was actually surprised that Canelo Alvarez, even though I, in my mind, always thought Canelo Alvarez was juicing as he, got up in weight, and looked completely ripped, where his traps had traps and things like that. I always thought there was a chance that he would be on performance-enhancing drugs. Sure enough, he was, but you don't usually see it with the more prominent premier names. That's why you've never heard of Roy Jones Jr. testing positive, because that was kept under wraps. A lot of people don't know that. And going back on Devin Haney, right? Some of the things that Brian Norman Jr. said with microdosing, there's no proof to it, right? He's not quoting his sources. He is, but he's not giving out his sources on who told him that, right? Who came out and told Brian Norman Sr. that Devin Haney was microdosing PEDs? That is discrediting, everything that he's saying, right there, by not quoting your source, right? Or just at least giving the name of your source. But to me, that could be possible. I remember some time ago, Earl Spence was talking about how he could literally take a 2-year layoff or a year layoff, after a fight, completely juice up, taper off, and nobody would know. Nobody would have any idea whatsoever. That's how weak these VADA testing, or at least drug testing in the sport of boxing goes. I'm not 100% sure, what the criteria is for VADA testing, what they do. But to say somebody's microdosing, all this stuff, sounds like it could happen, right? I wouldn't put it past them, is what I'm trying to say. And then when you mentioned something about Florida, right? I remember there's been multiple big videos that have came out about LeBron James, right? You guys remember him being on the Miami Heat, and that's, in my opinion, when he was in his prime, physically, right? Extraordinary athlete, but some people don't remember after that trade, when he went back to Cleveland. A lot of people were saying, hey, is this the LeBron that's going to start aging? Because he wasn't looking that good to start the season, right? And he took like two weeks off, went back to Miami, I believe, or somewhere in Florida, and went on a little hiatus there, and then came back and was a complete dominant player like he was before. And a lot of people have speculated whether or not, he went there because that's where his drug guy was. I believe there's been multiple professional athletes, you know, in other sports. I would have to go do some real digging to find them, but they have been affiliated with some steroid distributors in Florida. So when Brian Norman Jr. said that, I was like, okay, I could possibly see that as well. You know, there's multiple things that Brian Norman Jr. said, or Sr. said, that like I could believe, but the bottom line is, this is a guy who's never tested positive. You know, those seem to be wild accusations, you know, to put on somebody, and to make it worse, the fact that he beat your son. It's just, combine all those things, it's not a good look, and people are going to think he's a hater, you know, and trying to cope with his son losing that fight and him hating on Devin Haney, right? But my take is this: I believe something like that could be the case. I do think that could happen. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, if we're going to be completely honest, you know, the weight might have helped Devin Haney moving up to 147. He could have been his more natural weight class, and 140, 135 could have been, you know, bad for him physically, where I mean, we've seen pictures of him looking like a skeleton on weigh-ins when he weighed in at 135. But to have like a newfound power at 147, could it be the weight, you know, him feeling healthier? It could be, very well. But the fact that he dropped Brian Norman Jr. and looked to be the bigger puncher in that fight, and Brian Norman Jr. was a guy that had knockout of the year and dang near put somebody, or he did put somebody in a coma. Brian Norman Jr. was a big puncher. So to me, it just raises some red flags and some questions, right? Not to mention, I feel like Devin Haney's head has grown, like his whole face and his head have grown drastically over the years. You know, multiple signs for potential steroid use, in my opinion. But I don't know, man. At the end of the day, I can't put that on Devin Haney because this is a guy who's never tested positive. Would I be surprised if, you know, these things later on down the line become true? Probably not. I wouldn't be surprised. And if I'm going to be completely honest with you, it's something that I've thought about, you know, especially after that last fight with Brian Norman Jr. I thought he looked spectacular physically, you know, looked like the bigger, stronger guy, the bigger puncher. You know, I was shocked by that, you know, but I don't know, man. Let me know what you guys think, man. Is Brian Norman Jr. or Brian Norman Sr. just being a hater, or, you know, does this raise some questions for you guys as well? Let me know what you guys think. Hate, like, comment, subscribe.